This episode of the Unbuild It podcast is brought to you by Huber Engineered Woods. When we talk about Huber Engineered Woods, you know, we say they make Advantech, we say they make zip system, you know, they have liquid flash and subfloor glue and tape. And I think that most of our listeners are fairly familiar with their product lines. They make really high quality stuff that makes our job easier. But I also wanted to let you know that they have a couple of new products on the market that they just announced at IBSX for 2021. They have Advantech X Factor, and they have a new vapor permeable tape. And I think that those things are very important because they go to show what Huber Engineered Woods is really about. They're innovating and they're problem solving before even builders like myself have asked for those things. That process of innovation has kept them at the top of the game, at the top of the pile, and that process of innovation has caused builders like myself who are focused on durability and energy efficiency and really doing things the right way the first time to believe in them as a company and to use their products. We've been using their original Advantech formula since the late 90s as a company, and we've been using this zip system since 2013. So I think that proves to you my belief in the company. I hope that you'll look into Huber Engineered Woods, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Let's talk construction management software and what makes a software good. First, I'd say the ability to tackle the tasks that I need it to do, but more importantly, the ability for my team to comprehend the software, my clients to comprehend the software, and everybody involved to actually want to use that software or that interface. BuildBook could be that software for you. BuildBook is simple to learn and use. It allows for constant communication between you, your team members, and your clients. It doesn't waste time with unneeded features, and you won't have to send your team across country to learn how to operate it efficiently. At the end of the day, BuildBook should reduce your stress and your team's stress as well. BuildBook is an all-in-one construction software for today's builders. Whether you're a one-person operation or a large building crew, BuildBook has plans to fit your budget. They don't have any of those nagging sales calls or tricky upsells or hidden fees. You can sign up for a 10-day free trial with BuildBook so that they can teach you and show you what the value is of their product. You should head over to buildbook.co to get started. Don't forget to mention that you heard it from us, the Unbuild It podcast. That's buildbook.co. Thank you, BuildBook, for your sponsorship. Welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. I'm Jake Bruton, and today I am without Steve and without Peter. I have two other guests, so there's still three people on the podcast. But today, this will be the first time that we've had a Unbuild It podcast without one of those two being involved. So today we are going to talk about sheep's wool insulation. And because I'm joined with two gentlemen that work for Havelock Wool, we're going to talk about Havelock Wool brand sheep's wool insulation specifically, because it's fair to ask them to talk about the product that they hawk for a living, or that they sell for a living. So let's start with introductions. I'm joined by Cyrus. Say hello.
Hello.
And Josh.
Yeah, how's it going?
And let's start with what are your positions in the company? How did you give me the 5 minutes or less? How did you come to work for Havelock? Josh, you want to go first?
Yeah. Well, I'm the director of sales for Havelock. I'm just a sales guy, so it's a nice fancy title. But yeah, how I got interviewed or considered for the job was kind of less fortunate. I had a really good friend come out and go skiing and break his femur on the first run. And as a result, was laid up at my house for a while. trying to get back to New York City. And in the interim, one of his friends came over to visit. They hadn't seen him in a while, and his friend is married to Andrew, the owner of Havelock. And so that's how I saw his cool hat, and I was like, what's Havelock Wool? And then I had resigned from my job and taken a couple years off to try and finish a remodel and kind of have some fun. And it's probably getting time for a new job. And so I did a little market research on wool and insulation and what's out there, and determined that it'd be a good job to accept and help grow the company. And so it was fortunate but unfortunate in the way that I got into it.
Well, everybody breaks a leg skiing at some point, right? I think that's the best. It's either a leg or a Sonny Bono tree sort of thing. Yeah. And that's why I very rarely ski anymore, because I hugged a tree really hard one time. Yeah. And I mean really hard one time. What about you, Cyrus?
Josh and I worked together in the past. And so we've kept in touch, of course, with friends. And I started my own business after we both left the company we worked at previously, and did that for a number of years. And again, kind of the same thing, like been hearing about what he's doing, hearing about wool, and was running my own small business. But since I had started, had 2 small children, and kind of thought a more normal job that maybe required less of my time, even at full time, would be a better thing for me now. So yeah, I joined up over there when they needed another sales guy, and now here we are.
That conversation about owning your own business and taking a full-time job that would be less work. We had a conversation here with my kids the other night, and we were talking about a work week is 40 hours. And my daughter said, do you get 40 hours worth of work a week? And my wife chimed in from the background, normally by Wednesday afternoon, he has 40 hours for the week. And I was just like, holy cow, she's right. I forget about that sometimes because I like what I do. If I had to break rocks by hand for a living, it might not be as fun to spend this much time. So I thought that these two would be a good guest today on the podcast because a year and a half ago, I had no idea that you could even buy insulation that was made of sheep's wool. And then as I've started to learn, and over the last few days of hanging out with these guys and working on one of our projects with them as an education for our crew, I have a totally different idea of what I even thought sheep's wool was. So I thought the best place for us to start is, just like we talked about the other day, the place where let me back up a little. Everybody that I know that is aware of sheep's wool, that I've had a sheep's wool conversation about, brings up all those same things that we talked about in the last couple of days, where they're like, well, yeah, but it's being shipped from really far away, or yeah, but how many sheep does it take to do a house, or can't we find another way to? And I'm just like, well, I kind of was on the same path to begin with as pretty much all the people that I've discussed it with, but after spending the last couple of days with you and gaining a better understanding of what we're doing and the process of it getting from sheep to building, I have a totally different opinion on it. So I thought we would start with, okay, where do these sheep live?
Yeah, well, so the long and short answer is they're currently all hanging out in New Zealand. But one important point that I like to make about the insulation industry is, why does insulation exist and where does it come from? And how is it used to reduce energy globally, nationally? There's a point. We need to have insulation readily available for inexpensive cost to the mass of population, so we as a nation or a country or a world can save energy. So it has to exist. Now, when you start looking at the economics of it, it's typically made very inexpensively. It's designed to be installed fast. It's designed to ship cheaply. And those are all great things because we get to, like I said, save money as a nation on energy. But when you start to make things very inexpensively, there's also the introduction of chemicals or glues, or the race to the bottom where the materials degrade over time as the shareholders need more.
Well, and installation too. When we start talking about that race to the bottom, the least skilled labor on lots of job sites, it's the insulation crew.
Yeah. They
have, a lot of people look at roofers and concrete guys and go, that's That's really hot. That's sweaty work. That's horrible. But until you've spent an entire day blowing cellulose in an attic and wanted to take a shower at lunch just so you felt like you could get food in your mouth, like there's a...
Yeah.
And I use that as an example because our cellulose crew, he readily goes back to the office at lunchtime and takes a shower sometimes because it's that gross.
Yeah. So you have this inevitable race to the bottom, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is the free country and the free market. But to set the tone, now Havelock and sheep's wool comes in as almost a polar opposite on the very other end of the spectrum. In terms of cost, I'll say it right up front now, we are more expensive and we also do more things. And so the large role for us just plays on education. But let's take it back in New Zealand. Currently, there are less sheep in New Zealand than there were years ago. The population there has definitely dwindled. The sheep market or the wool market has faltered, and we feel like we want to try and bolster and use that unused coarse wool because there is no market for it, basically. The particular breed of sheep that we use is a Romney breed. It's a dual purpose. It is used for meat. And then we grab the wool that literally nobody wants. There's some rugs, there's some home furnishings, but it's not a fine wool that you would use as like a merino for wearing or for layers or for long undies.
And if you're curious, I looked up Romney breed the other night, actually, after Josh told me about the breed. They look like sheep. They look like every other sheep that you've ever seen. Yeah. They look just like sheep. So you can just picture sheep in your head. You don't have to picture a specific sheep that was raised for meat. It just looks like every other one. Yeah,
there's so many great side stories. We'll get to a lot of them. But a lot of folks that buy from us have raised sheep in the past. They have a connection to wool. They're knitters. They put their kids in wool diapers. They're hunters. They understand when it gets wet, it keeps you warm. And that relationship has brought them closer and faster to understanding why it is actually useful in your walls. But let's go back to New Zealand. All right. So the sheep, I like to say it like this, are just partying all day long. It's pastoral. It's beautiful. There's waterfalls, glacial melt going into the ocean. There's not that many folks. That's kind of the tone for where the sheep are hanging out. But they're partying all day in their own dung and hay and dirt, and the sheep skin releases lanolins in skin secretions, and so you really have a smelly clump of matted wool after it's clipped, and you have to clean that properly to be used, in my opinion, and I think that of most everyone else in our company. You have to clean it properly to be used as a professional building product. And so that, unfortunately, is something that we don't have the infrastructure to do well and at scale here in this country. And there's another history lesson back there in the late 1930s. If we had 130 million sheep in the country and we chose to push towards synthetic fiber development and not really natural ones.
And the cattle industry.
So it's still a big deal over there. I think the gross domestic product is still, over half is the export of wool. So there's organized trade. You can buy and sell wool easily, securely. You can get to specify your grade, the diameter of the fiber, where from the sheep it's cut, because some fiber have different uses for different areas of the sheep body. And then it gets cleaned, what they call it scoured. And that's typically a process of either chemicals, which is like solvents to cut grease, or in our case, lots of hot water and slight agitation and multiple dips into the bowl to remove and free up the vegetable matter, which is the dirt and the hay and the dung, and of course the skin secretions and the lanolin. So that removes a lot of the impurities, the smell, and you're left with still a product that not anybody wants, and that's where Havelock jumps in and grabs that raw material. Now, we do face some scrutiny, obviously, with bringing this stuff across from another country and here into the West Coast, which is where our current plant in Nevada is. But when you start looking at the the transportation costs and the infrastructure around shipping containers versus trucking around the country on LTL or full truckload, it's wildly more efficient to be using a container ship with 4,000 boxes on it. We can fit about 44 bales of wool into a 20-foot container. Each is about 800, 900 pounds, and it's packed to maximum density using a 200-ton press. And so that alone is extremely compacted, not to kind of bear anyone with more interest in the wool fiber, but it's shaped like a spring, and it's very resistant to compression, which also happens to be a great thing when it's in your walls. But it's very hard to compress. And when we do get it over here in Reno, the unpacking process is totally exciting too.
Because it's so compacted.
Because it's so compacted. And when you release the metal bands that have this pressure in them, it explodes like a shotgun. There's a number of them, 10, 12, 14 bands. And we've gotten to the point now where we've made a metal cage to control the explosion, basically. And everyone leathers up and face shields up and puts their PPE on and has at it. And it's kind of fun because throughout the facility, we're opening up 20, 30, 40 bales a day. And it's like fireworks. It's like 4th of July. Yeah, so everybody gets excited.
So does everybody that work in the warehouse find it as amusing as you do after they put up with it all day every day?
Yeah, perhaps not. I won't speak for them. But yeah, we sat down as a company a few weeks ago and kind of made up a triangle of like defining who we are and what we stand for and what our goals are. And a lot of it has to do with, number one, having fun and smiling and enjoying what we're doing and coming to work happy. And so that, of course, means, a good salary, but also having time off and family coming first and exercise and eating well and getting health is what we're trying to embrace here, not only in how we work and conduct ourselves, but in the product we sell. It's just natural that we do that, I think.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of things that I should have mentioned at the beginning. Number one, we are recording out in the common space of our office. So if this sounds different than our other podcast, or if you can hear people talking in the background, sorry, we're taking the opportunity to record this when these guys are in town. I also realized that every time that we've talked about this on camera or the past couple of days when we were talking, we talk about like the carbon impact of shipping things overseas and things like that. But we haven't referenced other insulations. So first of all, carbon impact is not the only reason to use any product. It might be part of your decision-making process. It might not. You might be a spray foam only contractor and only care about what the R value is in the wall. You might be, the Michael Maines or Emily Montrim of the world and think that the houses that you're building need to be carbon storing. It's your choice. But I think the thing that I just realized when I was listening to you this time, Josh, was if we're talking about the shipping process as the part that could potentially be like the most potentially detrimental, instead of the enormous kiln that is cooking basalt to make something or the mass recycling operation that has to take place to make it, I think that we're actually headed down like a red herring there when we even discuss that. Do you think that would be fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we just paid some good money to have an LCA and an EPD done, third party, to show in a more professional manner what our carbon count is. And so there are some disappointments along that way that we ran into. One big one for us is that, yes, the Romney breed is dual purpose and it is going down for meat. Nobody wants the wool. We thought we'd just take it, and that counts as a positive for us. It actually doesn't. We get dinged, so to speak, for that. But it's interesting to think that we would need that there's savings in consuming more energy to make a product than there is actually saving when it's in your home and in use. Yeah. And so there's some flawed thinking there. Yeah. We use the term a lot, you pay to play. With every study and certification and test, you're paying to enter this space that kind of tries to push you into a box and quantify you. And that doesn't always work with newer products or newer ways of doing things. So I'm not saying we're, very progressive in that regard, but it's something to consider. What I thought was the most powerful message is come to my facility in Reno and look at the size of my dumpster. It is a small, dumpster that you'd have in your, in your business or your home. 3 or 4 trash cans worth.
Yeah, 1 yard.
A 1 yard dumpster.
1 yard dumpster for manufacturing.
And there's no smokestack coming out. It's all run on electricity, and we have very efficient motors that drive the machines. And so our power bill monthly is considerably less than anyone making insulation. I know we're a very small part of the market, but it's worth talking about.
Yeah. Well, and we also forget as builders or architects or the people that are speccing things that once we decide to build something, we've already decided to make an impact. Once we've decided to build something and we do a poor job at it, we've made a much bigger impact. If we don't do a good job air sealing or insulating or choosing where we put the building or just keeping the water out, that's way worse than, one shipping container bringing 40 houses worth of insulation over in one container at a time. So we have to, everything has to be bounced off of some sort of, we're making an impact either way. If you listen to the episode where Peter and I talked to Jeff Speck, one of the things that his book Walkable Cities discusses is the energy intensity of a building is almost entirely based off of where we locate it. So it doesn't matter if we use the most progressive and forward-thinking building practices. If the house is in the mountains, it's the house is in the mountains.
Yeah.
You'd be better off from a carbon standpoint living in a multifamily that's 25 or 30 years old in a walkable neighborhood. So it's a red herring in my opinion.
Sure.
I think the point of everything that we've talked about so far is it comes from sheep and it's better for the environment than a lot of other things. And now we're going to talk about it from a insulation standpoint.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be fun. And I think Cyrus's take on the Instagram influencer or the millennial, as I think he's blushing already.
I am one, so or technically I don't know where the line is drawn, but I'm very close or on it. So
I thought we would start the conversation on what the insulation actually does with a, which might be surprising, a van life discussion. The entire market of people living out of their van or their car or their SUV, whatever it is, and how you guys are actually kind of involved in that scene, that society. Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We've become very involved in that scene. It turns out the smaller a space you live in, the more you care about what you put into it. And so surrounding yourself with other things may not make sense when you are living in 100 square feet. Moisture is a huge issue. It's a metal box. So you want to try to do something to manage that moisture, vent it, put a roof vent in, put an auto vent in, open the doors. But also if you can have some insulation that helps manage that moisture, it's going to go a long way for you. Wool's very good at that. There's a ton of science on wool. It's one of the most studied fibers of all time. So it's not marketing or salesmanship. It's university studies that say wool manages moisture. It can absorb a third of its weight in moisture. What could be wrong with stuffing it in the walls of your van? It's going to give you the insulation that a sheep has when it lives high in the mountains in winter. And it's also going to, protect your vehicle and yourself from any other surroundings.
And when you get that tin can in the morning, the sun comes out, condensation, or you're in there overnight, breathing all night, exhausting
your
into
dog,
it.
Your wet ski gear, all of that stuff.
I feel like you're
wetsuit,
tapped into the, since you immediately went to dog and wet ski gear, because I feel like I'm not ashamed to admit, I do fantasize a little bit about that van life thing and follow a few people on Instagram that live in their van that looks really cool. Like you said the other day, or like we agreed, nobody wants to poop in their car. Let's live in real houses. But it's nice to see it like that.
And go see all the wonderful places. Yeah, exactly.
Not live in one.
It's easy to be jealous listening to all of these folks that are really from wide variety of life. Some have lost their housing, their job, and now it's a financial aspect. I got to live somewhere. It's in a van. And the other end of the spectrum where I'm touring the country in a $200,000 van and enjoying every inch of this wonderful country along the way. And we're sitting there at our desks with a small window and just like, tell me more. Was it possible? What did you do? You know, and that's the fun we get to have is around the conversation of insulation. And I think that is unique. I don't know if there are the cellulose, the fiberglass, or the spray foam guys that have fun conversations about what they're doing. I know it's kind of indirect, but at the same time, we chuckle about it all day long.
It is a very entertaining aspect of everything that we've talked about. And it was surprising to me with the first time that I looked at you guys on Instagram. It took me a while to figure out how easy that is for you guys for a market share.
Yeah,
it does make perfect sense.
Yeah.
If you're going to sleep within 2 inches of where your insulation is, you're probably going to consider it in a different way than you would in a 7,000 square foot house.
Definitely.
You know,
definitely. And mold issues in vehicles like that, you know, mildew, things like that. Wool doesn't have those problems. Wool helps with those problems. So a lot of old trailer manufacturers, people go to renovate them. They take the walls off. They see what's behind them. They know they don't want to put that back in.
It's not going back
in. Not just the stuff that actually came out, but a newer version of the stuff that came out. We want to put something else in because we don't want it to end up like that, because fundamentally nothing's changed in a lot of those other products, you know, and nothing's changed in wool in 10,000 years either, but it's always done this, and it's what nature intended it to do. And so it's very good for that.
Let's, because Cyrus so eloquently put the 10,000 years mark, let's talk about wool from a historical insulation standpoint. You were giving us a spiel on that the other day.
Well, yeah. So I don't know too much about it, although I'll claim to know a lot as a sales guy. I know everything.
Same here.
Yeah. But, you know, the original sheep didn't have to be sheared. So we bred them to produce an insulation fiber for us. So now we're stuck having to shear our sheep. And it's typically every 5 months. Different breeds have different timelines, but generally that. So what do you do with all that wool? You have to take it off the animal. If there's no market for it, then the alternative has always been shove it in your walls or turn it back into the soil, because it's a great soil amendment for nutrients and water and all that great stuff. So that's traditionally what it's been is an insulation that you would put in your cave or put in your stone walled house that's very leaky and not airtight to give you some warmth and often wet and damp. And it has thrived in those environments. That is, you know, now the opposite of building science, where we know much more and trying to avoid that. But that's where it's always come from, is an insulator, not only for the animal, but once it's removed for the animal, for humans.
Well, we have that conversation about put a coat on.
Yeah.
If you're cold, wrap your building in insulation. If you're cold, if you're a sheep, grow more wool so that you're not cold. And if the sheep can get by with it as a solution to the temperature outside, then your building, in theory, should be able to as well.
The fiber has evolved to do so many things over however many millions or hundreds of years that you prescribe to. But hands down, it's evolved to do this. And so, you know, insulative value is one of them. Moisture management is the other. The ability to absorb harmful chemicals like VOCs is yet another. And if you literally Google the science of the wool fiber, you are going to hopefully have your mind blown. There is so much incredible information there.
Let's talk, before we move on to what it actually does as an insulation, like our values and install and what we've been doing the past couple of days. Let's talk real quick. The other question that I've gotten the past few days about posting stuff about wool online is the allergy standpoint. And I think that we agreed yesterday that we could start that conversation with, if you're allergic to wool, you might not use it.
Yeah.
Like it sounds overly simple.
Yeah, we'd hate to have you sneeze
but
a lot.
Yeah. It's the same as you wouldn't eat peanuts if you're allergic to peanuts. And I had never really considered it before, but I'm assuming if you're allergic to wool, at this point in human history, you probably know it because at some point some grandmother has bought you an ugly sweater that was made of wool that you itched nonstop. And, so chances are.
Wool is a known hypoallergen. I don't think hypoallergen really has much scientific meaning other than a lot of people typically aren't allergic to it. So it's rather rare, but in the thousands and thousands of customers that we now have, and we get to talk to each and every one, we know that it's rather rare. So we've infrequently run into it.
And I was looking into wool allergies last week for this type of conversation. And one of the things that I read was like, chances are you're not allergic to wool. Chances are that sweater was poorly made and had synthetic fiber in it and it was itchy. And that's why you thought you were allergic to it. You weren't actually having a skin reaction to the chemical. You were rubbing sandpaper on your skin in the form of clothing. And that's why you didn't like it.
Yeah. Things have progressed some in carding and the processing of the loose fiber of wool, but there is some technology now involved, and they are able to get the wool to lay flatter, know which kinds and breeds they're using, which, merino, for instance, a nice fine hair that doesn't have a lot of scales on it. We use the merino, like we said, the Romney, but it's a coarse. So under a microscope, it's got a lot of scales on it. And what do those scales do for us? They trap air. And that's what we're trying to do. We do have tons of Instagram shots and folks, wrapping themselves in the wool bats that we send them, or the installers on the job are like taking a nap and they're sleeping on their wool pillow, getting some Z's. But yeah, that kind of stuff is far and few between. It's in your walls and mostly removed from you.
Yeah. I think a pretty interesting thing too is I've had a number of customers think they're allergic to wool and ask for a sample, and we're happy to send them. Put them in a box, sometimes ask us to bag them up first and then put them in a box so they're not, affected by the shipping process. And I haven't had a single one say that they had any reaction to it. So I don't know what the reactions they'd had in the past were, but I always follow up with them and they always say it didn't bother me. And that's immediate, like firsthand contact, open the box up, stick your face in it kind of thing, not it behind your walls, which isn't even,
You crack up to see what our sample box literature says, hey, Havelock Wool, welcome. Thanks for requesting this. Number 1, rub it on your face. Number 2, stick it in a glass of water. Number 3, parade around the house and scream and yell. And then number 4, put it in your garden and let it amend the soil.
Yeah,
and then let us know if you're interested, kind of thing. Yeah, it's really interesting to us.
It's a good PR and marketing box for sure. Okay, so the last 2 days, or last 2.5 days, you guys flew in from Reno, from, let's call it, world headquarters, and helped my crew install blown-in and bat version of Havelock Wool at our Hilltop Arrow project. You can find more about that on Instagram as well. It's #Hilltop Arrow. But let's talk about the blown-in process that we went through the last few days. Either one of you want to take it?
Yeah. So we make 2 basic products, right? Loose fill, which is blown into a cavity or a bib, and then a bat product, a fancy rectangle. The loose fill product is, I think it's the category winner. It ships very efficiently. It's got a very high R value of R4.3 per inch. And the coverage on it is great. So basically at the factory, we roll or spin the individual fibers into balls. So you can call them knops with a K. And those balls are now designed at the right humidity and the right moisture. You can kind of manipulate the wool fiber. Then that ball now traps even more air than it did before because we've manipulated it. And then we compress that into vacuum bags to get an enormous bat, 25-pound bag, which really would take up 4x4 by probably 6 foot tall, into 18-inch round sausage that's 4 feet long. But when it gets to the job site, then we break them open and we staple up a mesh like you would for almost any other product. The mesh that we prefer to use, although as you've seen, we can use almost anything that has some holes in it because the fibers are so sticky that they tend to stay behind. There's a lot of air that gets introduced into the blowing process. the wool stays behind in the wall and the air has to escape. So, a 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch mesh works great for us, so it can exhaust all that air. We started with like Intello and some of those other vapor open membranes blowing into them, and what are they designed to do? Be airtight. And then you have to poke enough holes to let the air out, and you end up using more tape.
And then you don't have a vapor barrier or an air barrier on that product anymore. That makes sense. So the couple things that we noticed when we were spraying was, number one, Cyrus was running the intelligent end of the assembly, and Cyrus was just pushing his hand on the wall. And that's something that I recognize like fully and completely from our cellulose installer, our fiberglass installer. They've done it enough times that they feel like they have an understanding of what that firmness or bounciness or whatever you want to call it, that pressure inside there. But you guys explained it as it's 48 square feet of 2x6 in each bag. Do the math, open the number of bags, make sure that you put all that insulation in those bays, and then just go back if you didn't put enough in one.
Yeah, that's how you would do it to start if you haven't done it a bunch. We've done it a fair bit, so you do get a feel for it for sure. But it's 1.13 pounds per cubic foot. So you do the math, you separate out how much you need per bay, you blow that into the bay, and after you do that a handful of times, you'll start to see what it looks like and how it feels once you've done that. And then you can stop measuring and just kind of start going through the house like your cellulose or fiberglass guys do. They have a special tool. They usually push it against the studs, has a little spring and it with a little plunger, and it tests the density of their material, and that's how they can check to see if it's correct. And after you've done that a handful of times, you can start doing it without the plunger. So
the beautiful thing, though, right, about the wool fiber, I know it's corny because the fiber has so much integrity to it, but it has a natural loft that it wants to be at. So, of course, we test to make sure that we have the correct density per cubic. But what's really nice about the wool fiber is that it's not very specific. The curve is more broad at the top. So with other fibers, I won't dig on them, but the fiber has less integrity. There is a very specific amount you need to get into that wall to get the R value. If you get too much, you go back down the curve. If you have too little, you go back down the curve and you lose your R value. And wool, because again, it's a natural insulator, isn't as specific. We have a specific number. If you're a little under, if you're a little over, as long as you're air sealing, you're getting all the value out of that. So in my opinion, it's easier because you don't have to be so specific on what you're doing.
You have a broader range that it's still effective. So, if you have, I'll say fiberglass or whatever, if you have fiberglass, the insulative properties come from the voids. They come from the air gaps that are in the product. But if those air gaps are enormous, like I can stick my thumb into it, I compromise a 12-inch radius around wherever I can put my thumb into it without touching any material. If I pack it too densely, it becomes solid. If you were to take it to the extreme, you could pack it to the point where it would literally have no voids or very few voids, and it loses its insulative property.
It becomes a conductor at that point.
So the other good thing that you just brought up was air sealing. This is an air permeable insulation, the same as the other fluffy stuff that we've talked about. This is not an air barrier. We still need to be managing for air movement before we talk about any fluffy insulation as well. Now, I made the comment that Cyrus ran the intelligent end of the operation. Myself and Josh and Brad and Sydney ran the less talented side of the operation. And I thought it would be nice to talk about that side of the install because it is not the same as other fluffy stuff insulations. Do one of you guys want to?
Yeah, so you can go and rent a cellulose or a fiberglass blower at the local shop or maybe Home Depot, a big box store of that sort. Those blowers typically have augers in them that crush up and aerate the brick of the material you've bought, and then that goes through a fan and an airlock. And so, again, the integrity aspect of the wool fiber is just so strong. It is not brittle like cellulose. It's not brittle like stone wool or glass wool. And so when you start winding it around, it literally winds up on moving parts, and it will bind or wind so incredibly that, number one, you will scream for 3 hours straight as you're trying to pull it all out. So for that reason, we try to steer away from the more conventional blowers, and we use something else. that's still recognized in the insulation category. It's an insulation removal vacuum. Number one, we have to kind of admit it's kind of funny that exists. Why'd the insulation go bad in the first place? Well, it did, and now we got to remove it. So you suck all that out. What we do is use that same exact machine, and what we say is we run it in reverse. The engine's not going backwards. The blow hose becomes the suck hose. That's the reverse part of it. And we use it as a blower. So when we flew across the country, we didn't bring a big hopper with us or anything. We brought a 6-inch, duct return vent, and we cut that into a sheet of plywood and put it on a table, and took a bunch of the plastic bags and stapled it up on the plywood so it's a nice and slippery surface. And we just broke bags open, and with our hands, we just tear off puffs and throw them into the 6-inch vacuum, and that goes through, hits the metal impeller from the gas-driven engine, and then shoots it out the other side through a 6-inch hose a 4-inch hose that's reduced to a 3-inch stinger or whip at the end so we can get it into a cavity fine and start the party.
And we had, yesterday we had job site visitors, 2 other builders from town stop by, and one of them was standing next to me breaking up wool with his hands and throwing it in there. And I thought, number one, I didn't explain this to him. He just saw what we were doing and understood it and decided to help. And then he said, "This is fun." And I thought, well, you haven't been doing it for 2 days, but okay. Like anything that's repetitive like that, halfway through the first day, I was like, oh, I can totally put my headphones in and listen to a podcast while I stand here with 3 other people, because there's a gas engine running a little ways away. That's the blower or the vacuum. Yeah. And it can be kind of mindless.
Yeah. Well, and he just decided to jump in too. Yeah. It's like, it's not very often a builder is going to come to a job site and see a job being done and just decide to jump in and help.
I think that's a testament as to who Peter and Alex are.
Yeah, perhaps.
Walked over and he was like, "I'm here for the full experience. I came to see this. I want to see what it's like. Let's figure this out."
Well, he should have tapped my shoulder out and handed him the hose.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me, and I was waiting for it because you could see the smile on his face. And when he said, "This is fun," I was like, if it wasn't COVID, I might be hugging you right now because you nailed it.
When's the last time you heard an insulator say this is
borderline fun? It's work, don't get me wrong, but the work gets a lot worse than that.
Yeah. And he said, "Oh, I think I'm going to be done now. He said, "I think I'm going to be done now. That was a lot of work." And I was like, only the trim carpenter would say, standing still for 5 minutes and moving just my arms in an unconditioned area would be too much work for a moment. Yeah.
I mean, it's an unconventional way to insulate. Of course, it's sheep's wool. That's unconventional in this country. We'll change that. Give us some time. But the machine is unconventional as well. I think the industry, the insulation industry is typically very low margin. There's not a lot of money on the deal. And so if an extra day or you messed up on your bag count, when you incur that loss, your margin's eviscerated very quickly. And so, like we said before, insulation is designed to be installed with speed, typically by lower skill or lower skill worker. And that's fine. But when you get to this point, a little bit more time to get a better product isn't the end of the world. And what we try to educate the consumer on is just that. Here's a look into someone's books who owns an insulation company. This is what they make. This is why you're going to probably get some resistance when you ask them to do this. Here's how you can do this on your own. And here's a list of people that don't mind doing this because they see the value in it.
And I think that, you're steering it sort of towards the cost conversation. You said immediately, it is more expensive than some of the other insulations on the market. It is a higher R value or relatively close or higher to the other fluffy stuff insulations. So we're not taking a hit there by making a choice. The only, besides being a most likely more health conscious decision, you get a small R value bump and it costs a little bit more. And the conversation is, well, so does 5/8 drywall. So do Silestone Group A instead of Group C countertops. So do garage doors that have full glass in them. You make a set of decisions on every project. We are faced every day with choices that all have a financial implication. And many of those choices that have a financial implication are not made solely off of the financial implication. And so this is a very sales pitchy podcast for us. I mean, we're just talking to one manufacturer. It's just me. I'm not forcing them to task on anything because I don't think there's anything that I'm like, yeah, they are both substantially taller and larger than me. So maybe I am handcuffed right now and I don't have any choices to what I say.
No, good work.
Yeah. Wrap it up, Jake.
Yeah.
You're getting a little wordy there, buddy. It's just everything is a decision. Everything is part of a larger process, and we just have to educate ourselves on what's available. And that's why I wanted to. They didn't know they were going to do a podcast today. I impromptu said, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" Because, like I said in the beginning, a year and a half ago, I didn't know that sheep's wool insulation existed, and it's a pretty darn interesting product. And maybe we don't help you guys sell anything from doing a podcast like this, but we just have enough people get educated that at some point they go, oh, I do have a solution to that. I mean, we could use sheep's wool instead of X or whatever it is. Or maybe you like sleeping in your car and this product that makes it sound horrible. And this is a thing for you. Is there anything that we missed, like that would be, if you were the website, the FAQ section of the website, that
I wrote that too. But
your boss will be like, come on, why didn't you bring that up?
So we call ourselves healthy, high performance insulation. So there's the health aspect. We went through a lot of that. Healthy for the occupant, the person who has to live in this house that you've built or you built yourself. Healthy for the planet, that kind of thing. And then there's the high performance. And my wife will not listen to this podcast, so I don't risk anything here. But when she brings home organic dish soap, I smirk and say, "Is it really going to cut the grease?" Organic laundry detergent. I feel like you're sacrificing something by that title of organic. Obviously, you're not. But the high performance aspect is real. The higher R value, the ability to absorb sound, it scores high on the NRC, the noise reduction coefficient, for the ability to absorb sound. Like we said, it likes to manage moisture. It passes the mold test. It does a lot of really interesting things. It absorbs VOCs. And so the high performance part, you pay more for a product that does more. If it gets out of the realm of what insulation is typically supposed to do. You're not supposed to want to absorb and release moisture from insulation. It's supposed to be hydrophobic. The stuff that was made long ago was hydrophilic. It absorbed it. That doesn't work. We want something that repels it. This does. But when you start to look at the science of the wool fiber and its ability to absorb and release, you realize it's not wet to the touch. It's not a sponge you can wring out. Through that process, of absorbing and releasing, there's heat generated, there's cooling effect generated. And so everyone talks about insulation as saving money. The idea is to save money on your heating bill. And wool insulation does that. But what it also does is it modulates temperature. As temperatures swing outside, your heat comes on less. Your AC comes on less on the inside because it helps buffer that for humidity and temperature. And that's high performance. That's what you're paying for.
We should, let's start to wrap up, but let's also not forget to talk about, has more Vans. No, the other question that I got that I didn't even think about earlier when we started this conversation is, is it flammable? First, we can start with nothing gets approved by code to go into your walls with, you are building your house out of wood, most likely, that is flammable. So everything on some level just about is flammable. But it has a Class A fire rating for is it ASTM E84? And that's achieved partly by the fact that wool is naturally fairly self-extinguishing, but it also is treated as well. Can you?
Well, so wool, sheep's wool, in case there's any clarification out there needed, won't support a flame. has a very high nitrogen content. Nitrogen does not burn. So we have that going for us. This stuff is not going to catch fire like a chemical-based insulation or one made of paper. So what we do is we have that going for us, and we don't need a lot. We use just a little bit of boric acid to go into the Class A, because we think that's a big deal to the occupant, to the builder. Certainly the code officials love that too. So we get a little bit of boric in there to get that Class A ASTM of E84. And the rest is just easy. The boric also helps with the resistance to bugs and moths and mold and mildew. So it has some other benefits. And you'll see if you're able to read labels of other insulation companies, are able to read those
added
labels.
to a lot of different products that are insulation
in
products.
A lot higher percentages. Absolutely.
Okay. So I just wanted to record the podcast, like I said, to just say, hey, I didn't know about this, and I think it's pretty interesting. Interesting enough that we decided to put it in one of our houses and see if we like it. So far, the house is in condition, so I can't tell you if it's working or not, but I think that the conversation is worth having. If you have questions for Havelock, should I just direct them to the website?
Call, email, smoke signals, stop by, have a beer, whatever your preference is for communication.
And if I Instagram message you, do I get Cyrus? Or
directly to me.
Okay.
Yep, you'll get me straight off.
Or TikTok, if you know how to TikTok.
Oh, there we
take
go.
That as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so look for Havelock on TikTok. This is going to be a good conversation for me to have with Peter about why that was what we talked about.
Yeah.
I think that might be the first time that TikTok has been
not
mentioned on the podcast.
You guys are missing out.
Okay, this is the Unbuild It podcast. Thank you guys for listening. Look up Havelock Wool. Look for the Hilltop Aero project. That's a house that Steve and I are doing together. You can see a bunch of that stuff on Build Show Network. You can see it on my Instagram. And I'm sure that there will be more conversations about the wool and how it's working as that house progresses. Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. If you have questions, it's questions@unbuilditpodcast.com, and subscribe. The only way that we know that you're listening for sure is if you are a subscriber and you download all the episodes. And as Steve puts it normally, don't hesitate to sign up 5 or 6 times through different email accounts. Sign your kids up so that they get a version of this as well. So thanks for listening. Have a good day, guys. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thank you.
Good to be here.